His worst sin.
Oh, it's so Jesus. It
We're
says
going
so.
live, guys.
Jesus never saved anyone. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, it's about baptismal regeneration. He's holding a sign that says, "You must be placed in water for salvation."
I'm sure David's never been prouder.
Yes. It's a pretty good depiction of David, actually.
I'll have to check it out. Grab a share your screen there, Dave. Let's see.
I'm holding my phone and yeah, so I'm not sure how to do a screen share on my phone.
If Shia Alexandria is watching, I've got my kombucha and a mason cup just for my
Is it
hipster
Shia or is
cred.
it Shay? I always thought it was pronounced Shay.
Okay, sorry, Shay.
I'm drinking kombucha tonight.
Oh wow, cheers. I know a girl that's named Shay, but I think her entire name is Shayla, something like that. So that's just what I'm going to think of from now on when I think of Shay Alexander.
This is
Alexander,
pineapple.
not Alexandria. Pineapple. I've got gingerberry, and it was free because we know people who get stuff from Whole Foods for free. I guess
there
stuff
we
that
go.
doesn't sell.
So we should let everybody know tonight. We're even less agendized or prepared than we normally are. So we're open to whatever anybody wants to hear us opine about. So if you have something you want clarification from the week or whatever, go ahead and hit us up in the comments, and we'll try to address it. Excuse me. Welcome, Anthony. We're live already. You have audio?
Well, while he figures out how to unmute his mic, I'd like to draw attention to the book behind me. I hope everyone can read this. The Fire That Consumes by Edward Fudge. And along with that, I know we're not going to talk about this tonight because people don't want to, besides me. I always want to talk about it. But I wanted to do a little demonstration, a little show and tell.
You gonna burn something?
So this is a piece of paper. And kids, definitely do not try this at home. But what I'm going to show you is what happens with fire. Notice that it's this is actually probably a bad idea. Notice that it's completely consuming the paper, and by the time it's all said and done, there's nothing there. So that's just a little show and tell. I know that 50% of the people on this podcast, even though that 50% their views do not coincide, I know that 50% of the people on here really have a hard time with the idea that fire would consume something.
Well, that's not the hard part. It's how you get smoke from that to go on forever and ever.
Just like Sodom and Gomorrah.
We said we weren't going to talk about this. What in the world? Now, I will say, His Holiness George R. Bronk actually addresses that issue in his seminal book, Ready Scriptural Reasons. They were going to put scriptural reasons that I made up as I thought of them, but that didn't fit on the title, so they went with the shorter. We'll just say he was pulling a bunch of stuff out of someplace. We're live, so we won't say exactly where he was pulling it out of, but it was like one of those magic clown scarves, where he's just pulling it and it keeps coming out, But yeah, it's an amazing book if you can lay hands on that book. But he addresses that issue, and he says basically, when you burn something with fire, well, it's not actually gone. There's smoke and there's ash and there's heat energy that's released, and so that proves that people don't burn up either.
Yeah,
you can't argue with that.
if we want to get into this topic, we should invite Chris Dade on. David, do you know who Chris Dade is?
You're still popping a lot, Titus.
Yeah, you are a lot.
Maybe I should just get rid of this mic and just use earbuds. How's it sounding now?
I don't know. It's a little fishy.
Yeah.
Okay, hang on, I'll be back.
Are you following the feed on DKCM, Dave?
I'm just pulling it up just now. Let me see. Okay, we don't have any questions yet. Come on, ask your questions, guys.
Well,
What do you want us to talk about?
We didn't advertise or anything. You know what we should do is pull up our meme of the week. I told everybody that that Andrew Powers Cuomo video meme was the top contender. I got 3 or 4 votes for it.
Yeah, that was funny. No.
But then also yours was in the running too. I had a few people mention yours with the water pipe, Dave.
Oh yeah, people seem to like that one. That one just kind of came to me as a way of expressing what everybody thought. Drew said I did a better job explaining what he believed than he was even able to articulate. So I felt like I'd really heard him.
And what's up with all of you guys going to this Wesleyan college?
Yeah, we didn't all go to the same one, but there's
just a one.
Yeah, with the Conservative Holiness Movement has let's see, four major colleges that they're kind of affiliated with different ones of the major denominations. There's Hobe Sound down in Florida, and there's Allegheny Wesleyan here in Salem, just about 10 minutes from where I live now. And there's Penview, which is out in, actually there's 5. Penview, which is out in Penns Creek, Pennsylvania. And there's GBS, which is the oldest one. That one's down in Cincinnati. And then finally there's UBC in, what is it? Westfield, Indiana, I think. A suburb of Indianapolis. So I attended Allegheny Wesleyan, and Joel attended Hobe Sound. And then his name, I'm drawing a blank on the other fellow, that Zach attended or attends currently GBS. So yeah, it's very, very similar culture, although where I went would have been a lot more conservative, like GBS and Hobe Sound. Definitely Hobe Sound would have been considered very much on the liberal end of things. Allegheny was kind of has a fair level of godly pride in their stricter stances.
Yeah. So how holiness are the holiness still? Like no Coca-Cola holiness or no necktie holiness?
No, they would, like Allegheny is kind of they're not like strict about it, but it's the whole white shirt, black tie kind of thing. Black tie is a little bit of their uniform. That's changed some, but they're pretty hardline. Depends on where you talk in the denomination too. Like every place else, they loosened up over time.
Yeah. I knew I never been around a whole lot of holiness people, but I was friends with some Pentecostal holiness people for a while in Virginia and North Carolina, and those dudes are pretty serious.
So what group would it have been?
I don't know. You know those churches with like 17 words in the title?
Okay.
Like the Church of the Holy Jesus Christ and Word of Prophecy from the Apostles and the Scriptures.
Okay, that would be, yeah.
Blue Mountain Revelation of Jesus by the Holy Spirit Church kind of churches.
Okay. Yeah, that's not something that wouldn't be in the conservative holiness umbrella.
Well, they were Pentecostal holiness.
Okay, yeah. See, the the holiness people I would associate with would draw a firm line of distinction between them and the Pentecostals. Like they don't believe in tongue speaking and all that kind of thing. Although they do believe in spirit-led emotionalism.
Oh, come on now.
So
How do I sound now? Am I still popping?
No, you sound better. You sound a little tinny, but you sound much better.
Someone messaged me and asked if we could discuss the Holy Kiss.
Oh,
Oh
I
boy.
don't know what you all think about that, but that
Titus and I have very strong feelings about the Holy Kiss.
okay.
Yeah. Well, I think that we should go ahead and not kiss each other. That's where I'm at.
COVID-19, you mean?
Yeah, especially now.
It's just chalking up the reasons.
Yeah.
No, but seriously, you don't approve it. You don't approve a guy smooching.
I mean, it's fine within a culture where that's the accepted greeting, but in our culture, it's certainly not. And I think that the Holy Kiss is just a prime example of a topic where it feels like the whole like literal wooden obedience to Scripture becomes there comes a point I think where we would all agree where it becomes a little absurd. And I guess we have different cutoff points, and that's my cutoff point. But maybe you guys wouldn't agree with framing it that way. Maybe there's no point of absurdity for you. I don't know.
Well, so I think that's it's you drew the mark at the right place. Whether or not those injunctions from the apostles are something that's a condition of that culture, or if they're injunctions for the church writ large. And I prefer the idea that they're actually instructions for the church across all time. The fact that it's called the Holy Kiss, not a greeting, not just like a customary greeting, and the fact that other customary greetings are talked about in the New Testament, like the right hand of fellowship. Like there are other kinds of customary greetings, but none of them are called holy. And there's one thing that's called holy, and it's the Holy Kiss, or the kiss of charity. Those kinds of modifiers on that greeting distinguish it as something special and unique to the Christian culture. And I think now, okay, so that's I think textual fact. Now let me speculate on why I think that is. I think that the kiss of Judas is such a central component to the passion and to the message of Jesus in the context of a family of disciples, that the apostles passed on this form of greeting into the church as this internal compass about our relationships. And so what I think is that anyone who's serious about the gospel of Jesus and knows the passion narrative has to think about Judas when he kisses his brother. And you're either playing Judas or you're playing straight with your brother. And so when I greet my brethren, when I see them at a meeting or wherever, and I greet my brother, there's this, like, if you have some ought against your brother, something inside of you goes, ugh, like I'm the Judas, I'm the betrayer. And that's why I think that the Christian greeting is supposed to be forever for all of us, the Holy Kiss, the kiss of charity. It's this it's this barometer of our relationship that's built into our culture.
And you get the whole Judas thing from one of the early church fathers, not from the New Testament itself, correct?
No,
As
it's
far-
the
as
part
far
in
as
the
the Holy
Garden of
Kiss.
Gethsemane when Jesus is betrayed with
Yeah.
a kiss.
Sure, yeah, but I'm talking about connecting that to the Holy Kiss. Or is that your own idea?
I don't know if anybody. I have to look. I'm not familiar with that. I'm sure somebody has, but that's not where I got it from. No.
It's original with you?
I mean, unless I read it and didn't take note of it, but I usually take note of stuff I read.
I mean, you could be right. All of what you said is plausible. It just, I can't get myself to believe that that's true. You know,
why is it called holy, and why is it called charity? Those aren't things that are just customary greetings. I don't give people holy handshakes.
Well, if the early church was in 2020, then that's probably what Paul would have said. You know,
really?
it's for the holy hug. Yeah, I mean, the Bible says whatever you do, do it all to the glory of God. Like we're also supposed to do everything. Let everything you do be done in love, right? So, that as far as the kiss of charity, that kind of falls apart if you compare it to that verse. Now, why it's called holy, because we're supposed to be holy in the loving way we greet each other. I mean, I can see why you can construct an argument for it. It just it doesn't land with me in the same way that Paul telling, I guess it was Timothy, to get his coat for him and drink a little wine because of your frequent ailments. I mean, that would be, I think, your cutoff point where you'd say it's absurd to say that we all need to drink a little wine, and that's a biblical principle, right? So that's my point at the beginning, is we all have a cutoff point where that sort of literal wooden adherence to the letter of the law becomes absurd. And I draw it at the Holy Kiss. Like I just can't get myself to believe that that was like some powerful ordinance that was laid down.
So, yeah, I mean, I could continue to argue with you, but it would all be along the same lines. Like the narrative of the betrayal and the centrality of the kiss in the Passion narrative are more than coincidences when you consider the apostles telling people to greet each other that way. But what I will say is that I think that's a fairly sustainable way of looking at those injunctions, and we do know that it was the common practice for the church. And here's a test case for, I think, something that's a relevant way to look at how do we use the patristic examples, and what good are they and what good aren't they. I think I agree with you, Titus, that if we had some kind of, if Followers of the Way decided that we had to, anytime I went and saw Finney, I had to take him a parchment, that would be weird. Or we had to go on a pilgrimage to Bethany every time at a certain time of the year because Jesus walked that way or whatever. Like, I get it. There's some weird things that people will do with obviously localized instructions from the narrative, but the high churches are famous for that stuff. But I don't think that things that are described as holy custom fall in that category, and that are given by way of instruction.
I think I would do better debating hell with you. I wasn't really prepared to debate this.
Can we agree at least that if you're going to practice it, it don't mean you have to kiss people in the airport?
You don't have to do anything.
Disagree with that. I think you should, if this is the correct greeting, why not do it all the time? Like, why are you ashamed of it?
Well, I'm not. We do. I greet my brothers when I see them in the airport.
On the lips.
I don't know. I'm not planning or plotting, but we kiss each other.
Do you kiss your brother in Christ as the customary greeting every time you see them? Like, you forego a handshake?
No. There is something extemporaneous about it. I think what we try to do generally is that we try to do it at meetings because it's a good marker. Like, especially if you live in community, like when I lived in the same house, like the same driveway as Finney, every time we saw each other, we didn't greet each other. But we made it a point to do it anytime we were coming together as a church, so that there was a good reminder that we were, if we were going to have communion together, if we're going to have a meeting together, if we hadn't seen each other for a while. Certainly if we lived apart from each other and I picked him up at the airport, I would greet him. Like, those kinds of like remembrances, I think are valuable. But I'm not ashamed about doing it out in public. I don't, like a brother I haven't seen, like one of the brothers from the other congregations that I never see. If I run into him in Boston in a sandwich shop or wherever, I for sure will kiss him.
And so why don't you kiss across genders? I mean, is that just sort of a common sense thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Just propriety.
But
Yeah.
it doesn't say that, does it?
No.
This conversation will become exhausted very quickly.
Your mic's off, Anthony. We don't have any sound for you.
I think we can exhaust this conversation very quickly because I don't really have any more arguments for my cause besides I just don't buy it,
Well, okay, but let me ask you this. Let's do a little bit of Titus analysis since we're at it. is growing up in a wooden church where it was this kind of stodgy, customary thing, like a wooden action that happened. And I know how young men growing up in those churches are super uncomfortable about it, especially, you go through instruction and then you go from one Sunday hanging out with your buddies to some old man kissing you and you're like, it's weird. Is that a part of your reluctance?
Yeah, I'm sure my entire worldview is colored deeply by my upbringing in the Beachy Amish Mennonite world. I mean, I've only been away from that world for 7 years or so. So most of my life has been, and I'm 26. I haven't had a lot of time to form a ton of. Well, actually, I have formed a ton of beliefs other than what I was taught. But it takes a little time to sort through things if you've grown up in such a strong group like that. So I'm sure everything has been colored by that. And interestingly, getting to know the Kingdom Christian crowd, it has more than anything begun to shift my perspective to where I am starting to accept a lot of those things again, just because it comes from a totally different starting point. And it's sort of like it's surprising and new and fresh, a lot of these things that I rejected, and it makes me way more open to them. So that's me throwing you a bone. But there, yeah, I don't buy it. Like, well, if I was listening to, and there's probably a little halo over my head because of this, but I was listening to David Berceau's book, The Real Heretics Please Stand Up, and I listened to like 8 chapters of it as I worked. So there's my virtue signaling for everybody. All the Kingdom Christians out there, I was listening to the Pope of Kingdom Christianity today. But one thing he was really emphasizing in those first couple chapters of that book is how the commands of Jesus and the apostles are countercultural, right? And so the Holy Kiss clearly was not in the normal, customary cultural greeting. It looks like Matthew's lost right in the middle of my wonderful speech addressed to him. But anyways, my point is that it was not countercultural. It was cultural. It was getting the current cultural greeting and infusing it with a supernatural Christian love, right? And that's what I would say we should all do. That's how we should apply that scripture today, is get the current accepted cultural greeting and infuse it with a holy, special Christian love. And it's so great that Matthew's not here because he can't rebut what I just said. So I'm all good on that front.
Yeah, I think we have lots of unity now that Matthew's.
Yeah.
Are you a kisser, Anthony?
Well, I was just going to ask if there's historical precedent for whether the early church practiced it across gender or not. I think that's important to know, because if you're going to say, well, I don't do it because propriety across gender, well, then I can make that same argument for doing it at all in the modern world. But yeah, I'm not a voluntary kisser. I do kiss my wife, but I come at it from kind of the same perspective that you do, Titus. There's Matthew again.
There we go.
We lost him. Titus gave you a very nice little speech, Matthew, and you were just gone for it. So I think it was maybe the Lord didn't want him to cast his pearls before swine.
Maybe.
That might have been it.
Anthony was asking if the early church, if there's examples of the early church not doing the kiss across genders. Like, did they only do it between genders? And he made the point that if we're using the propriety argument to not do that, then he could use that same argument to say we shouldn't do it in our culture at all.
There's some indication that in some places, like I think there's 1 or 2 mentions of actually greeting across the genders. Tertullian has kind of a vague reference about a woman who's married to an unbeliever and how would he tolerate her greeting in the church?
Oh,
And I don't
yes.
know if, I don't, you know, how much do you put on that? I don't, when it's one or two statements, what we know is ubiquitous is that the Christian greeting was always going on in all the churches. Were they doing it across the genders everywhere? I don't know. What evidence there is, there's a few comments that they were. So
And
when
no,
you
and no evidence
practice,
to the contrary.
what's that?
And no evidence to the contrary, correct?
That not greeting across gender lines? I don't think so.
Nothing said about, yeah, that suggests it's.
I think the
within
other
genders.
reference is actually Hermas. His guides are in female form and they greet him. I think
Yeah.
those references that I know of that are about greeting.
so if that's what the
So,
early practice
I-
was, then why not continue that?
Well, on Hermas, they're
Well, Matthew never saw that question coming.
no, I've quite a few times. I don't know that those are. I don't know how relevant they are. I don't know if it matters or not. I don't think that it invalidates the custom by not greeting across gender lines.
Well, I have a question though. I think, I don't know if the question is whether it invalidates the custom, because I'd probably be more, here's my quotable for the night. I'd probably be more interested in it if it was across gender lines, because that would suggest that we actually believe what you're saying the kiss means, which is that we're a family. It would mean that we have that brotherly, sisterly relationship within the church, that in the exact same way that it's supposed to not be weird when two guys just meet in Walmart and kiss each other, that it shouldn't be weird if a man and a woman kiss each other within the church. And I really do believe, I believe that if we have the kind of relationships we're supposed to have in the church, that actually wouldn't be weird. I am not convinced that greeting is supposed to be carried over, but in our group, we embrace with the people that we're the closest to it in a brotherly and sisterly way. And we don't, and I don't hug my sisters the same way I hug my brothers, but there's a wholesomeness and freedom you have with people you have really invested in that way, that the church really is supposed to be closer to each other than brothers and sisters. So if we're going to take that very intimate custom out of it, because the early church practiced it, because Paul says to do it, but we're then going to strip it of one of the primary symbols, which is, in kissing cultures today, let's say France or Italy, I'm not terribly familiar, a lot of Arab, I don't know how it works in those, but in Muslim cultures, but in Western cultures that still kiss, if you have a close female relative, I think it's normal to kiss across genders as well. It's not something that's just done between men who are close to each other. And so I think there's you're actually, if that kiss is it's carrying some kind of almost sacramental meaning, I think it matters whether we're suddenly knocking half the church out and excluding them from that, because we're actually, that's a pretty big distortion of what the early church was doing if they were not distinguishing.
Well, that's a big assumption, and it's not cutting anybody out if women greet women and men greet men. And there's lots of kissing cultures where you would never kiss a woman. The Arabs certainly are a kissing culture.
Of course,
they wouldn't kiss across genders.
Right.
I don't even think in antiquity, and I think even in European kissing cultures, it wasn't all that common. I think that the kissing across genders, even among French and Italians, it's more of a modern phenomenon, like American hugging across genders. That wasn't nearly as common 100 years ago as it is today. So I think the fact
even within families, though.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I kiss my mother or my sisters. I usually hug them. I have from time to time if I haven't seen them in a long time, but probably not my sister, but probably my mother. But that's a super, super individualized version. I think that what I think is important is that the custom continues in the church, and I think that in there's the fact that we see a variableness that women greet women, or in some cases greeting happens across gender lines. The fact that the church is still greeting and keeping that alive among the brethren is what's significant. I think that's supposed to be carried on. How it's administered, whether you do it at the airport, across genders, what are the times and seasons when you do and don't, all those are variables that I don't much care about. I mean, I care personally, but I don't care in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think I would say that make that same statement, but I would just back it up one step, which is what, to me, the core of the thing is that we have this kind of extremely deep, intimate family love between us in the brotherhood, and that's one of the marks, one of the external marks of what sets Jesus' disciples apart from other people. And that there's this supernatural love that transcends family, that supersedes, the normal love between families, even, that will die for each other, and that there is some visible way that's being manifested to the world, because Jesus says this is how you'll know, how the world will know that you're my disciples. And I think that's, to me, when I look in the New Testament, I see the way the kiss seems to have been used. That's what it manifests. That's what that's why Judas's crime was such a crime, is because he had that kind of relationship, was in that kind of relationship with Christ, and he violated it. He engaged in that manifestation of brotherly love hypocritically. But to me, if that's the reason, if that's like the core of the purpose, if that's the foundation for the Holy Kiss in New Testament times, then whatever manifestation of brotherly love most makes the internal reality most readily available to the world's observation, is what we should be using now.
So I just have a slightly different focus. I mean, all those things are true enough, but I think that the reason that the kiss is enjoined is because of its distinctive place in the Passion narrative, and the individualization of a barometer of my relationship with my brother is really what's it about. I mean, there's all kinds of ways in which we demonstrate our love for each other, and in our care for one another and our charity. Like, there's lots of forms of that, but there's nothing like the kiss. There's nothing that is a reenactment of the Passion on the regular for the church, that displays like where I put myself in the potentially in the betrayer's position. That's what I think is unique and remarkable about the Holy Kiss. So I think now, again, nowhere says that I'm finding a reason from a practice, but I think it's a very good reason.
So Matthew, would you agree that if Jesus had been crucified in 2020, that Judas would have probably be betraying Jesus with a hug, or with, a dap? Is that what it's called? The urban?
I hope not.
No, seriously though, if it was 2020, that's probably what would have happened, and therefore from then on, in the year 4000, people would be, there'd be the holy hug or whatever, and it just seems.
Yeah, but
So
he'd had Cheetos at the Last Supper too, so.
That's a good
Yeah, that
point.
kind of revision is fraught with
that completely
problems.
refutes my point. That point falls apart completely upon that observation. And so if it is true that it is tied to the betrayal in that way, then I would say that in the same way that we should use wine. Point taken. I don't see anywhere in scripture that it's tied specifically to the betrayal in that way. So I would say your work is still in front of
Did
you.
the patristics?
In the script, in the New Testament, in the patristics, I don't know.
Well, here's another good barometer of how culturally adaptive people are. It's a similar thing. I find that people who don't hold a high value on the Christian greeting also don't hold a high value on actual foot washing. Like they see in Jesus's foot washing example more of a moralism, a parable, an acted out, like serve one another, be nice to each other. And it's kind of a Quaker take. Like you don't have to really wash each other's feet, just do the kinds of things that are servile to one another. Whereas it seems like people who are generally more disposed towards these literal enactments of these things, like the Holy Kiss, are much more see Jesus saying, happy are you if you do these things. And they say, okay, Jesus is telling me to actually get down on my knees and wash my brother's feet.
And I would actually agree with that. I mean, my church does do foot washing and I don't have a problem with it, but I do think that if we fool ourselves in believing that getting down and doing a ritual foot washing is anything close to what Jesus was doing by actually washing dirt off of his disciples' feet and actually taking the servant's position that was in the first century, I think we're completely fooling ourselves. Like it's just, there's not the same scandal as there was in the first century for Jesus to do that. And there's not actual dirt on our brother's feet. So I think that we should take a moral principle and say, whatever it is in our culture that is that scandalous and that, culture bending and culture breaking and countercultural, we should do the equivalent of that. And I think that's actually more important than the ritual of foot washing in the church. Although I personally don't have a problem with doing it as a ritual, but I would see the primary application of that scripture as, find the cultural equivalent of this and follow Jesus in that way. Having said that, the story of Jesus washing his disciples' feet is one of my favorite in the entire gospel, because there's nothing more powerful than the teacher doing that for his disciples. It's amazing. But yeah, I probably wouldn't attach the same sacramental value to it as you would.
Well, we're throwing the sacramental word around a little loosely. I don't know that I'd put the Holy Kiss or foot washing in a sacramental category, but I would put them in a literal obedience category. And I would rather someone serve their brothers and not wash feet than wash feet and not serve their brothers. But that's not a mutually exclusive thing. I think that to actually go through getting on your knees is still humiliating. It's not in the same way. I certainly agree with you. It doesn't at all mean the same thing it does. Although I hang out in a little bit less refined circles than Anabaptist crowd, so I've washed plenty dirty feet. But nonetheless, it's not the same servile position that it was. But it is humbling, and there is something remarkable about holding your brother's feet in your hands and washing them yourself. Like that is a humbling act. It does
Sure.
something to us to actually perform that duty. It doesn't answer the whole problem, but it does do something to us.
If you've ever had the conversation with somebody who's not used to the practice of washing feet,
Right.
I take a little bit. I agree that in our culture, it's probably not as scandalous as it would have been for the time of Christ. But there is something there that there is a resistance to. If you didn't grow up doing it and you suggest to people that maybe that's something Jesus intended, oh, absolutely not. That is ridiculous. I'm not doing that. I'm not okay with that. And I've had those conversations. We were talking about being at Holiness College. I've had that conversation with all my holiness friends, and that's just like, I would never do that. So I think I
Right.
really think there is some value, like you said, Matthew, in the getting down in your knees and, the water. And that there's just something really valuable about it. Even if it's maybe not the complete connection over cultures. I think it's a different kind of scandal, but I still think the practice of feet washing is scandalous even now.
So here to
Well, I
come
think-
full circle, we don't I don't wash the sisters' feet in our congregations, in any of the congregations that I've been in. But I don't think that means that we've lost the effect of participating in that ritual. Like the substance of it is still there, even though now did they in the early church? I don't know. Do they in other places? I don't know. I certainly wouldn't call someone
Pope
a sinner
Francis
for doing
does.
what we do. Who does?
Pope Francis.
Oh, he washes women's feet.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
anyhow,
but so yeah. See, to me, I don't think, like, I think that's real. Like, if we can use a practice to like really put a visceral as a training vehicle to really plant that concept of humiliation between our brothers, that leadership is getting down and serving. I think that's a good thing, but I don't think that resistance is like that I don't think that resistance and that sense of irritation to the selfish person is unique to foot washing. I mean, if you imagine, for instance, the scenario of let's say David Berceau, since Titus has already titled him the Pope. David Berceau comes in from out east to some meeting somewhere. He's going to be a featured speaker, and he notices that the bathrooms are just a chaotic mess. Like, somebody that was setting up the logistics of the meetings didn't get, nobody got assigned to that, and so people run across him in the restrooms down on his hands and knees with his sleeves rolled up, cleaning toilets, because it needs done. Like, that would be a very startling thing to someone. And many people who reach a like many people would not want to do something like that unless they would feel like if I've got this status in this social situation, then I don't belong down here doing this. I've got important stuff to do. There's all kinds of ways that changing a baby's diaper or somebody overflowed the toilet at one of our meetings recently, and a young man who I think hadn't grown up in a big family cleaning up toilets a lot, ended up mopping up the bathroom while the rest of us were getting started with the meal. I mean, there's all kinds of things like that are just a segue into this. I think this is a worthwhile thing to discuss. I don't think it's an argument against practicing literal holy kiss, literal foot washing, but I think it's something definitely to be aware of and maybe to discuss if we're going to promote it. And that is that I don't know if this is causative, but I have observed that Christian persuasions that practice many of those, detailed, who tend to view those things as commands for all time, like you do. The other three of us have this Anabaptist background. We've all, in the Anabaptists, modern Anabaptists at least, tend to draw a lot of those literal scriptural interpretations out and then try to practice them, whether it's done after the fact or before. And what I've noticed tends to happen is that there seems to be a correlation between people feeling very satisfied that they are fulfilling this principle because they obey the commands that other people are neglecting. And that very sense of accomplishment almost immunizes them from recognizing the way that they are flagrantly violating them in the actual places where it counts. And I can think of, for example, I spent some time in Hutterite colonies, and there are colonies. I think most Hutterites would agree with me on this. There are colonies. They live in common purse. They officially have nothing, and yet, a lot of the people on the colony are completely selfish, living to get and grab whatever they can, and yet most Hutterites have this, who are still living in the colony and loyal, have this very strong belief that they, among all the people of the world, are fulfilling the book of Acts. They're living in this all things in common. They're living in this situation, and because that very belief prevents them from repenting. And it appears that that's exactly what was happening with the Pharisees of Jesus' time as well. How do you, what's the connection between those things? What causes what? And if you're going to practice those things like foot washing, things like, maybe a more structured form of common sharing, or a the holy kiss, or these kinds of really literal interpretations. How do you make sure that those things actually are leading you toward the principle infused in everyday life, and not immunizing you against repentance where you're not practicing that principle?
Yeah, I think that's the religious tendency, because those same groups also hold non-resistance, and it becomes about not going to war
Yes.
instead of actually overcoming.
Yeah.
So it's across the board that we see that the ritualization of a belief system kind of tends towards this stultification, this woodening, or making rigid and stony. Like, I have a practice to hang this idea on, so I don't really conceptualize what's going on at the heart of it. And that's just the tendency of religion, I think. And so it's something that always needs to be guarded against. It's something that always needs to be. And I think that looking for fruit of those things is one of the curatives. There's probably others, but to what's sad to me is that group, when I talk about the holy kiss as a convert to the concept, I encounter people all the time who have never thought about why it should matter. And that discourse about the passion narrative and this internal barometer in the Christian greeting, that's a signal to me, like the churches that have used that and kept it, it's so detached from the meaning, that the potential meaning in it, and it's just across the board with everything. So looking for the fruit of those things, I think, is a huge part of, like, okay, we have foot washing, but do I have any concept of how I'm serving people in real ways? I'm greeting the brethren, but am I really acting like these people are my family? Like, you have to, any concept of the one and the other in real ways. I'm greeting the brethren, but am I really acting like these people are my family? Like, you have to, any concept of the one and the other in real way.
There's actually an interesting psychological, and I forget what the term for it is, but it's the idea that it's like psychological compensation. For instance, the stereotypical, I want to, somebody at a restaurant ordering a burger with extra cheese and 2 large fries and a Diet Coke, and drinking the Diet Coke then somehow in their mind frees them up to go ahead and eat the burger and the 2 fries. And I can't remember what the psychological term for it is, but it's actually damaging to people to have those compensating things, because then they excuse themselves for doing much worse things than they normally would have done because they think somehow it balances them out. So I think that if we're not careful to have practices in their proper places, like Anthony was saying, that I mean, 100% agree with that. That we actually, it's not even not a positive. It's actually a strong negative because it actually encourages worse decisions than than it otherwise would have been.
Well, and it can ironically other people, like I think what Anthony was getting at is, there's this form of how to write practice where we're the chosen ones who have the common purse, or we're the people who literally practice the greeting and, all these, like, the ritual observance creates this special group, especially I think in a culture, a religious culture, where there's so little of that. It can really make you feel special, like I'm one of the chosen ones because I still do it, and that probably has that exacerbates the effect, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what else should we talk about? Is there anything else on anybody's hit list?
You're muted, Anthony. Still muted.
All right, am I back?
Yes, you're back.
That's weird. My mic is just...
Are we running out of things to talk about, guys? I thought this was impossible.
Well, I was going to ask one more thing about rituals, and that is, there's a relatively small number of people in the world. It isn't a point for or against the rituals, but there's a relatively small number of Christians in the world who practice, say, foot washing and the Holy Kiss, literally, versus the Eucharist, for example. And there's an extremely large overlap between those Christians and ritualistic groups that pride themselves in their superior righteousness and like flagrantly defy the submission to Christ in multiple areas that matter. And we could name a lot of those examples, but I think they're top of mind for most of us here. But at what point does the fact that most of the people practicing, at what point do we say there's an approach to interpreting practices like that and translating them into modern life that there's an approach to that produces literal renderings of certain of those commands that most Christians don't see as commands for all time, that also tends to create ritualism just in across the board. Are those two things coming from the same source, or does a certain way of looking at how we translate scripture into practice, or is there a certain way of looking at that then sets us up to create ritualistic systems? The ritual supersedes the principle. I'm not ready to make the argument that it does. It just seems to me that it's the correspondence is so high, the correlation between those two things, that it's worth asking the question.
Yeah, I would approach again the other doctrinal distinctives of those same groups and ask the question in the same light. I mean, does believing in non-resistance produce people who are insular and don't know how to reach out? Like, I think that there's a correlation, not a causation, between those things.
Mm-hmm.
Especially
there's a lot more Christian groups. that believe in non-resistance than there are that believe in the literal holy kiss and foot washing. I think.
Well, you're still talking about a very, very small slice of the modern Christendom pie. It's just maybe a little bit bigger.
Yes, you are. Yeah. But go ahead. I don't think you were finished. with your
Yeah,
point,
I just
Matthew.
think that I think that that's that. So when I look at a lot of these issues, where I put the onus of the problem is in what happens when the church withdraws and insulates. And I hate to say it, but that's basically synonyms with conservatism to me. When the church does that, when she's not actively reaching out and making disciples and living like the church in her given area, that's what happens. I think it can't be any other way. Like, it's a function of the church turning its back on the world and retreating into her whatever corner of the world she's scratched out for herself. But what happens that vivifies all these things, not just out in the world, but within the church, is having to articulate it and having to explain it and having to have it make sense, and talking to people who know nothing about it, who know nothing about the gospel narrative, who know nothing about this foot washing practice, who know nothing about the holy kiss, who know nothing about the gospel teachings, having to explain those things and make them make sense to somebody else, and watch people assimilate to those ideas and latch onto them and make them their own, is the process by which these things stay alive in the church. And I think that's across the board. That's doctrinal stuff, it's praxis stuff, it's the whole thing. When somebody comes from outside, sees it, loves it, changes and assimilates to it, and then goes out and does the same, that's the process by which all these things stay alive in the church. And when the church loses that mission, that's when all these things become bulwarks, and they keep things out instead of bringing things in.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I like that a lot.
If we were going to transition to another topic, I thought we could talk about COVID a little bit, because and I know that's not a great segue, pretty abrupt there, but there's been some new findings. I'm thinking of I think it was antibody tests in New York City that they were doing on people that showed that a very, very large percentage of the people in New York have COVID, which means that it's a lot less deadly than we thought. Like, I guess the mortality rate is still higher than the flu, but much less than 1%, or at least less than 1%. Now, does that make a difference in how we as Christians are supposed to respond when it comes to things like social distancing, or is it good news and bad news? Good news in that it's less dead, bad news in that it's contagious, and at the end of the day, the same amount of people are dying, right? So I'd like to discuss that. I'd also like to discuss how in the world are we supposed to access good news sources for this? Where are some places that we can go to find facts? And thirdly, what's this whole narrative about the way they're counting it? Are they actually, getting more money if they say that they had a COVID death, and is that incentivizing them to give higher numbers in the actual amount of COVID deaths, or is it actually less because not everyone is getting counted? These are some topics that are rolling around social media right now, and I'm wondering if you guys have been following it at all.
Anybody want to take that up?
I have been paying not a huge amount of attention to it, so I'm not a good one to ask.
Yeah, I mean, I've watched it some, but it seems like it's more of the same. I think in all these things, it's fascinating how common the Dunning-Kruger effect is.
Yeah.
Like, it has to be one of the biggest psychological principles at play in the modern world, probably because we have exposure to so many outlets for information and so little We know so little about so many things, and I think what's, it seems like this is a real indirect way to answer your question, but it seems like since the Industrial Revolution, Western society has become more and more specialized. Like you were a bricklayer, or you were a tanner, or you worked at a machine, or you worked at a factory. And even as small as the world was, even after the automobile, still a lot of people kind of were from one or two towns, and you knew everybody in town, and you knew all your neighbors, and maybe you grew up in that area. And that's rapidly changing, not just in the scale of relationship, but also in the scale of information. It's not just your local paper or a few major media outlets, or even, like if you look at Vietnam, you have 3 networks disseminating all the information on the nightly news about what's happening in Vietnam, and that's being filtered through government censors. And even at that, as much exposure as there was kind of broke the back of the war effort, because people were seeing it firsthand, even with all the censorship. So this idea that now we're becoming less specialized, and we know a whole lot, we know a little about a whole lot of things, probably exacerbates, I'm just theorizing here, but probably exacerbates the Dunning-Kruger effect, because we think we know a lot. Because in one sense, we really do. We know a lot. We know about a lot of things, but we don't know much about them. I'm inclined to think that the podcast phenomenon of the last 5 to 10 years is probably a yearning for some long form, for some detailed information. Like you look at Serial or some of the other big podcasts that changed the media narrative, the media landscape, where now you could know everything about one case. You could listen to 30 hours of information about one story. And that changed that, like it met a thirst in people generally. Yeah. So all that to say, I think that it's when something very complex like this virus, there's a lot of that going on. So I had a conversation with a friend about masks, and it was one of these, kind of, I don't want to make a caricature of what he was saying, but it was kind of they're taking away our freedoms. I'm not going to wear a stupid mask. If I'm not sick, I don't need to wear a mask. And you got to stop and pull that stuff apart a little bit and say, do you understand what we're talking about here? Like, this is about your neighbors. And so all this kind of like re-navigation of the territory and redefining of what actually are we talking about, and how quickly people are to jump on narratives that are just confirmation bias. Like another example is the Ahmaud Arbery story, this kid that got shot in Georgia. I don't know if I said his name right, but Ahmaud, he if you're left leaning, this whole story is about white devils hunting black people. If you're right leaning, it's just a confusion, and he was running around in a place where he didn't belong and probably was trying to steal stuff, and somebody tried to stop him. That's the only 2 narratives that you're getting out of this. And so who knows? None of us were there, and all we know are scant little pieces of information. How do you assess a narrative that's not ignorant, that's not just playing to either your biases or your propensity to the Dunning-Kruger effect? And I think that being slow and vetting sources is one thing, but it's not a very good solution, because none of us are going to do that much. I mean, as much time as we have in the day to catch up on whatever is relevant, it's only going to be from sources that we're interested in. So we're just kind of recreating that same effect. What I always recommend to people, and I think there might be some bad language in it, but Daniel Schmachtenberg on Rebel Media has several videos about sense making, and what his basic thesis is these things, whether you're talking about vaccines or COVID-19 or political controversies or economics, people spend their whole lives studying this one thing in a super specialized way, and by the end of a life of study, they'll tell you it's way more complicated than I could ever explain to you. So there's maybe a half a dozen people, a few dozen people that are qualified to give a real expert, qualified answer on it, and they'll tell you it's really hard to get it pinned down. And so what do you do? I think recognizing bias is the one thing that I would, to know what your bias structure is. What do I want to believe? And answering that question for yourself, if we could just do that one thing, especially, let me make this appeal to the church. If you could figure out your bias structure, the things that you want to believe and understand them, it's not wrong. Everybody does that. We all have things that we want to believe. Suppose I was just talking to somebody the other day about a bias structure that I had, that I wanted to believe something. What was it?
Eternal conscious part.
Was it?
No.
Oh, he wants to believe that.
I don't
no.
want to believe that one, actually.
Sorry, that was a low hanging fruit, but I had to reach for it.
That was unfair.
But my point is that I don't remember what it was now, but to be able to say, I know that I'm leaning this direction, and I need to be careful with information that just tells me what I want to hear, would be a super helpful thing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if my internet connection is cutting out a little bit, so hopefully I didn't cut anybody off. But yeah, I would second that very much. Who are rabidly biased in one direction, and they cannot, and they won't entertain the possibility that they're not seeing the whole picture. That's one of the things they all have in common, no matter what, is that they think all they want is the truth, and they think that they are unbiased, like they are pure rational agents looking at the information available and coming to the only plausible conclusion. And they'll that face, like no one who actually wants truth would ever draw any different conclusion than me. And that, you know, that seems like it's basically first grade when it comes to being able to make sense out of the world. It's being able to step back and look at yourself and say, yes, there's certain things that, like, I'm prone to appreciate, and like there's something inside me, and I'll call it out here. I won't use the name, but hopefully he'll watch this and know who he is. Posted a conspiracy prophecy video or something, and you know, so-called Christian people, and I don't know if this is true.
We're losing you, Anthony.
Yeah, we're losing you. That's too bad too, because it sounds good.
Okay. Let me see.
No, that's
Okay,
better.
I'm on a hotspot here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that
Okay.
picked up better.
Yeah, it's kind of my internet.
Have you heard of 5G? Maybe you should try out
Yeah, someone
5G.
posted. Hey, I'm on T-Mobile. I'm supposed to get it first. But I also live in rural Ohio. I get a lot of things last. But anyway, yeah, someone posted a you know, heavily partisan political screed that was masked, that was cloaked in prophetic language, and then like his basis for sharing it, he was like, he didn't check this out, like he doesn't know if any of this is true, but it definitely made something click inside me. And this was like, he stated that, and this is someone who's supposed to be a spiritual leader, and he is passing on highly divisive, politically loaded information on the basis of that there's a click inside, and like that's the first step in actually being able to learn anything, is to know that when I feel that click inside, when I encounter something, that's my cue to become extremely skeptical and double check everything, because like the best propaganda artists in the world know how to trigger that click inside you, And if it does that very well, there's a high probability that it's not the whole picture and that it's designed to move you to do something that's not in your interest.
There's a story I heard the other day. I don't know if it's germane or not to the subject. It's not germane, but it's definitely German. But the supposedly, I imagine it's a joke and not a true story, but supposedly a American journalist was visiting Germany back in the 1930s, and somehow manages to get an audience with Hitler and his cronies and his inside circle and everything. And he starts asking them, "What's your plans for the future? Where do you want to take Germany?" And Goering is like really badly wanting to tell him. Finally, Hitler says, he's had a little bit much to drink. Finally, Hitler says, "Go ahead." And Goering says, "We're going to kill 6 million Jews and a postman." And the reporter looks at him and says, "Okay, what's with the postman?" And Goering laughs and says, "See, I told you they don't care about Jews over there." Because the only thing he noticed was the postman.
Oh,
Because that's automatically what you ask. Well, what's the deal with the mailman? Well, and there's a lot of times where we do that. We zero in on the thing that seems weird, or this thing that seems interesting, or the thing that piques our curiosity.
Mhm.
And his immediate thought isn't, "What in the world? Why are you killing all these people?" His first thing is, what's the postman? So I heard that story the other day. I thought it was kind of interesting. One of the things that bothers me really badly about all this, the COVID-19 and everything, is this idea that I can figure stuff out for myself.
Mhm.
Because the thing is, everything in your life is based on what other people told you. Let me just use a really obvious example. I've never been to Boston. As far as I know, Boston doesn't exist. Now, I've met people online that say they even say they're in Boston right now. But how am I supposed to know that's true? And then the other day, we had this woman on here from this place called Malaysia. And there's people that'll show you that on a map. Have you ever been to Malaysia? Anybody in here ever been to Malaysia? I haven't. Have you guys? I've never
Nope.
met somebody that's been to Malaysia. She claims
No,
she's from
no.
there. But the thing is, even if you drive to the airport and buy a ticket that says you're going to Malaysia and hop in a plane and the pilot and everybody says that you're going to Malaysia, how are you supposed to know you actually got to Malaysia when you get there?
It could still be a setup.
It could still be a setup. Or I could get in my car and drive to Boston and follow the signs. How do I know that it's not some type of conspiracy? I have to trust that most people out there are doing the right thing.
yeah.
And once you start breaking that down, well, you can believe any preposterous thing.
Yeah.
I think I think I have some what I would call general recommendations for how people should encounter what it's based on is, what does a Christian response look like? And what I mean by that is, what's the most compassionate, most thoughtful thing and kind thing that I can be doing? Now, I can't change government policy, and I don't want to. I can't dictate to the governor when he should open or close businesses. I can't work through CDC research. None of that's within my framework. But what I can do is say, okay, I know there's something that's dangerous for people. How dangerous is it? We could debate that, and maybe we won't even know for years until all the numbers come in. I think there's good reasons to think that it's very dangerous for some people. How do I be as Christian to those people who are potentially in danger as I can? So, like, the mask controversy is a great one. Like, when I wear a mask, it's not to keep me from getting sick. It's to keep you from getting sick from me. That's an uber Christian response. I want to care about the community around me. So when I face that issue, and if government recommends or requires me to wear a mask, are Christian people the most likely to do the thing that's the most cautious and the most helpful to their fellow man, or the least? And sadly, in many, many cases that I'm encountering, Christians are the least likely to think about their neighbors, the least likely to think about other people. I don't want to wear a mask because it's a minor inconvenience to me. So who is the government to tell me they're taking my rights away? I don't think that's a right response. I don't know. I'm not a medical researcher. I have friends who are doctors. I've, we know people who are involved in medicine and what's happening, but I'm not there. I don't know. I'm not sitting in an emergency room. I have no idea. I don't know how billing works for Medicare and what they're doing for COVID patients. I know that our private medical system is in real danger because the medical system's shut down just like a lot of industry has, except for COVID. And so there's the medical industry certainly isn't getting rich over this. What I can say is this: given that complex of an issue, and given that we know it is a real threat to some people, we should just be cautious. So if the government says we recommend you wear a mask, wear a mask. What does that hurt me? Now, what I'll say is this too. I went for a drive with my wife the other day. We went about an hour out of the city to go pick something up from somebody. And I was driving through the sticks out there, and I was like, I can understand why people who live out here are upset at shutdowns. Like, I've got people all around me all the time. The idea that people are cross-pollinating viruses is something that's ever present in front of me every time I leave my house. I see people everywhere. If I lived on my little chunk of land and I saw 50 people a month, I might say, what is all this about? Why is this? And I think there's a reasonable thing that's being said that says, we should have a metered response to this. If somewhere is under a greater threat, take greater precautions. If you're in rural Oklahoma, it's probably not as big of a threat. Like, let those people do their thing. That seems sensible. Now, I still think that these kinds of cases are where there are authorities, and I have, for this anarchist, I'll tell you this. The one thing I've told people that I've learned through all this is it has really quite tampered down my anarchistic tendencies. I see very much the role of civil structures in coordinating and organizing societies for the good of man. And that's good for me, because that's not the side of state that I typically interact with. And so I've really been encouraged to see God's wisdom in even leaders that I very much don't appreciate on a personal moral level. I still see their function and capacity as being for the general good. And so I think that's the case with all this stuff. I think we should just listen and do the most compassionate thing that we can within what reasonable request that's being made.
Yeah,
that's my take.
And Anthony, earlier you were talking about the propaganda machine and the little check that you feel when you read certain things. And I think that we could also have a conversation about the rage machine and outrage culture, because I feel myself getting sucked up in it, to where when I scroll Facebook and see people that I know and care about posting conspiracy theories. I mean, conspiracy theories have become mainstream right now. Like, they, more than any other time in my life, they're more and more people are embracing them. And it just, but when I get outraged at that, I think to myself, why am I so mad right now? Well, maybe it's righteous indignation. I could say that, or I could say, no, the political propaganda machine is affecting me, because I don't get that outraged over Matthew's views on the Holy Kiss, even though I disagree with his views on the Holy Kiss. I don't even get that outraged over people who believe that same-sex marriage is okay. And I think same-sex marriage is sinful, but I don't get outraged at that, right? It doesn't make me mad. Like, the one thing that makes me mad the most is, or the few things would be, the Christian embrace of Donald Trump, conspiracy theories, this whole Christianization of the right wing, or right-wingization of Christianity.
Thank you.
But why? Why do I get so mad about this? And so I look around me and I realize everyone else is getting mad about this. Whether you're on the left or on the right, there is just this rage right now. And to me, that makes me think, I don't think this is righteous indignation. Otherwise, why
Yeah.
are sinners experiencing this too? And it just makes me pull back and be like, okay, people have views that I disagree with. That's fine. I don't need to get so mad about it. There, there's probably bigger fishes to fry than countering conspiracy theories. It doesn't seem to help. Just everyone calm down and go about your merry way, loving your neighbor and proclaiming the gospel and making disciples, and focusing on what really matters. So that's something I've been having to work through through all this too, because I think COVID has brought out the worst of people. Like, it just really has.
Well, the thing is, it means something different when it's your own people, and I think that taking up offense for the church is something that we're all kind of inclined to do. When we see flag waving, bowing to Trump in the name of Christian people, it's really, really offensive, and it makes me much more indignant than a gay pride parade through Boston, because I expect the world to be that way, but I don't expect my own people to be that way. And I think that's where the rub is. Now, how do we deal with that? I think the other thing is that, like, to sit down and have conversations across this line are so polarizing, and it takes so much work to keep the tone of those conversations mellow. Like, even those conversations I had this week, it takes a lot of patience and a lot of discourse to talk somebody around these roadblocks, if you can. And I think generally, yeah, and I think generally it's more work than it's worth, unless it's somebody that you care about very, very much. And it's easier just to get annoyed and frustrated and make a group where you can have some laughs and go on with your life.
Who would do that?
Well, yeah, that sounds very it's like jesting. That sounds like something that would send me to hell. But I do think to pull back and get very like metaphysical about this, I think there's something, I think there is an element of that. Like, that's what pro-Trump people cannot understand about why a Christian would be so upset about that kind of endorsement that the right wing is doing, is like, they think it's a political thing. Well, I just don't like Trump like everybody else doesn't like Trump.
Right.
No, it's like, if I saw people that I was close to, like, using messianic language about Barack Obama, I would be very angry and offended. Or about Bernie Sanders or anyone like that. But
right.
They didn't do it about those people. This is the Messiah they chose, and that's not overstating the case. So it's essentially, I'm watching my people be betrayed by large numbers of us, are just like jumping ship and following a different Messiah. That's something that makes a person feel angry and betrayed. It's the way the disciples felt about Judas, to be perfectly honest. And that's the way a person who's loyal to Christ ought to feel when people are, it's exactly the same as the Israelites making a golden calf and saying, "These are your gods that brought you out of Egypt." They're still they're holding a feast to Yahweh around. That's so we should be angry about that. But there's also an element of what Titus is saying, that when a hot button issue comes up and you suddenly see all these conspiracy theories, it's not like COVID-19 conspiracy theories. It's not necessarily a faith issue around. I mean, it's not necessarily it's an information processing issue for a lot of people. It's not a matter of allegiance necessarily. And why do certain things tend to, like, I feel the same thing that he's describing. Certain things just really trigger me more than others. And I think that's when it's really important to be aware that there are spirits at work in this world that are they're very opportunistic. And when something comes up that there's an opportunity to polarize people, that they will like they're right there, just encouraging the warfare. They want to see people that normally would love each other at each other's throats. They love it when relationships fall apart, lifelong friendships, the breaking point because of something stupid that people disagreed about. And there are many, and those spirits have many willing proxies in this world. They have, and many of them exist, for instance, in the world of punditry and politics, who are in lockstep with that plan to divide people up into tribes because it profits them. And so I really think that we need to understand that as one of those, that sense of rage that can manifest itself on social media as one of the manifestations of a spiritual battle that's going on. And those spirits do not care what political side a person is taking in the argument. They don't care whether you believe in the conspiracy theory or don't believe in the conspiracy theory. What they care most about is that they're destroying relationships and causing people to waste their energy attacking each other instead of fighting the spirits that are enslaving the world. And
I really appreciate this comment from Rosanna. She said people are worried about the future. They don't worry as much about their health when it isn't happening to them. They have a lot of time right now to think less charitable thoughts and also less people to temper their thoughts with. I think those are both two really salient points about all this, that along with how do I be compassionate to people around me, it's also how do I put myself in someone else's shoes, and to try to have these conversations around, okay, are you sure enough that you're willing to own somebody's parents dying because you didn't want to listen, because you wanted to be careless, because you didn't want a mask on? Like, that's a really, if you can pass this thing around for up to a week before you're symptomatic, you could be responsible for people dying, and that's something that should bother Christians. And then the idea that we're all kind of like stuck in our own little worlds right now, shaping our own little narratives. We've got we're literally looking at the world through a window right now, and that's a highly suggestive place with not a lot of external inputs. And that's the kind of place that's really ripe for these stukia that you're talking about, Anthony, the stukia tkosmu, the elemental spirits of the world that are at work in shaping and destroying humanity. That's a fertile ground for that. So how do we counterbalance that isolation and I'm stuck with me and my family for whatever reasons, or whatever small set of people. I don't have a lot of input. So then when we do have input, it's on Facebook or some other social media form, and it's all so much vitriol. It's so much, henpecking and fighting with each other that everybody's just getting more and more entrenched in their position.
yeah.
What I've been trying to do in some of these conversations too is try to find the reasonable concern. And that's not always easy, but it's a real reasonable concern that people are losing jobs and don't know where their paychecks are coming from. And I think if we can hear that out and say, okay, I get it, you're right, that's a big deal. How do we balance that? How do we balance that? It's not one or the other. How do we balance these concerns? And do we recognize that it has to be a balance? Like, I think people are all one side or the other, and we've got to put both of those together if we're going to have sensible conversations about it.
Something that the wearing the mask thing that I've thought about, even if you think wearing masks is silly, or let's even suppose we knew that that wearing masks was useless, that it was a complete waste of time. The fact is, the world around us doesn't. I mean, everybody else believes it. I mean, to me, it kind of feels like taking a gun that isn't loaded and waving it around and pointing at people. You're going to make people feel uncomfortable. Well, the dumb people, the gun isn't even loaded. Well, they think it's loaded. It feels loaded to them. They don't, or maybe they don't know. It's not it's not a Christian thing to do.
Right.
So yeah, I've been rolling that. That kind of hit me the other day. Rolling that around. Yeah.
Good stuff.
Where are we at, Matthew?
Well, I'm on my phone now. I lost my computer. So.
Oh, okay. So we
I don't
can
have
just
it
keep
rolling
talking
up on-
forever then.
We're rolling up on 8:45. So yeah, I need to get off here pretty quick. So
All right. Well, that I'm happy with where we all ended up. I think we should put some commercials out and request some input from people what they want to hear discussed. And do we need to find a stand-in for you for next week, Titus?
I'm kind of taking a break with my other podcast right now. So I might be able to make it, but I'll let you know.
Okay.
I am currently. I'll just tease this a little bit, and maybe you guys can be thinking of people if this one falls through. But I'm currently working on maybe having an appearance by someone I know personally who's a nurse, an ER nurse, who might be able to answer some specific questions about COVID-19 that people would have, and who could at least speak to the issue, like from working in a hospital environment right now, like, is this standard practice to cook the numbers? A lot of these assertions that are being made in the conspiracy videos that are going around. Do the rest of you think that would be something that would be useful to do?
Yeah, I think it's great.
Yeah, sure.
All right, I'm not sure if he's going to give his consent yet, but if he does, we'll announce that later on.
It is interesting.
And I think that would be something that we can. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, it is interesting to me that as soon as the numbers go over the flu numbers, suddenly the numbers aren't accurate anymore. If the numbers
Right.
would have stayed below it, that probably would have never become a
Well,
thing.
then those numbers would have been very accurate.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the opinion polls. The opinion polls are proof that everybody loves Donald Trump until they show that he's not popular, and then they're all cooked.
Yeah.
Right.
I think I would recommend everybody, if you haven't read the introduction to Orthodoxy, where Chesterton describes the madman,
Yeah.
look it up I think you can probably get it on Google. It's an old enough book. It's probably out of copyright, but the way that he describes a madman is like he should have called it the conspiracy theorist. There's a way of thinking that he describes as insanity in the beginning of Orthodoxy that he says the problem with the madman is not that he is illogical, it's that he can only be logical and everything conforms in a circle. Like, and he uses these examples. He says, suppose a man thinks himself the king of England and all men have a conspiracy against him, anything you would do to try to persuade him otherwise is evidence of his theory. And he described several different people that are in that state of the circular logic.
Mhm.
It's brilliant.
Yeah, it's when every detail of what you observe has a reason for being that way, that has to, and you can incorporate it into your into your little structure, then you're probably crazy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We should drop that in the link into the video description and maybe the podcast notes, whoever's doing that, and also maybe Matthew, if you could get whoever's posting the podcast the link to those Daniel Schmachtenberger videos.
Yeah, it'd be a good idea.
You recommended.
And maybe a link to InfoWars too, just so they hear both sides.
Yeah, there you go.
Did you see the video of him saying he's going to eat his neighbors?
No.
Oh my goodness. Maybe don't try to find it. But yeah, Alex Jones is planning to eat his neighbors.
Well, when you've been kicked off the platform, you have to do something to keep your listeners coming back.
Well, Drew's already on it. He posted the comment. So the last comment that I'm seeing on our feed is Orthodoxy by Chesterton.
There you go.
A very nuanced understanding, I hope.
Yes. Well, Drew wouldn't be recommending it otherwise.
All right, guys. Well, thanks again. It's good to be with you.
All right. Blessings to you guys.
Peace.
Yep. Good night.